Okay, joining me today is Brad Wharton, Cage Warriors commentator. And we're going to be looking at Cage Warriors 150 London. This is sort of like the first of a really, quality stint of Cage Warriors cards that are going to be coming in the coming months now. And yeah, it's a brilliant return. Um, Thank you for coming on today, Brad. How are you? And yeah, how are you feeling about this upcoming stint?
Well, I'll be honest, Frank. I am still recovering from jet lag from Cage Warriors California last weekend. It's my first Cage Warriors show out in California. Actually, my first time ever going to America.
Right.
I made a brief stop off there in Boston once on the way to Cuba, but never actually been to America properly before. So yeah, great experience. Living in a casino for a week was absolutely wild. I am considerably poorer than when I went over there, but them's the breaks. It was great to start the Cage Warriors calendar off over in California, and like you say, we've got a few months coming up now where it's just fight card after fight card, and some really big fights coming up.
Yeah. Well, but I guess before we get into London, what was the American Cage Warriors American experience like then? What's the crowd like over there? Obviously you had some sort of familiar faces in the commentary booth with you, but yeah, what was the whole experience like?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, like I say, I don't normally do the
Yeah.
Cage Warriors America events. Obviously, my good friend Josh Palmer, who I've commentated with for many, many years, lives in America now, so it kind of made sense for him to do them. With Angela Hill. Angela was obviously at the UFC that weekend, and I work for Cage Warriors full time now, so I was going to be there anyway in my sort of other media capacity. So it just made sense for me to kind of jump on the comms. But it was great. We had a bit of a week with the fight card. I think it's
Of
probably putting it
course.
mildly. We ended up with 6 fights on the night, and in the middle of the first fight, the State Athletic Commission pulled the second fight.
Yeah.
We had a fighter unfortunately fell ill. It was just one of those things. I think we lost 4 fights in 24 hours during the week, and it just can't be helped. And it's not like we're in Europe where Ian Dean can open up his little black
Mm.
book and get somebody flown in from somewhere in Europe. It's everyone has to be licensed, and the commission has to deal with everything. So it was challenging, but it went really, really well. The place was sold out. The casino were really happy with it. They're talking about doing more than the 4 shows a year we've already got scheduled. So yeah, really, really positive start for the year and an awesome experience. But yeah, this jet lag, man, not a fan at all. Not a fan. I did get to watch the John Jones fight on the plane on the way back though, which was wild. There
Nice.
was Wi-Fi on the plane, so I got to stream the John Jones fight in full HD at 50,000 feet or whatever it was, which was
There you
yeah,
go.
better than watching the usual in-flight movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean the Cage Warriors US sort of roster even it is looking great now. You've got guys like, highlighted by the New Year's Eve card when we had the US versus UK or Europe, I guess. But I digress. Let's get to Cage Warriors 150. Straight at the top of the card, we have Jordan Vucenic making his comeback or his return after that rivalry sort of ended with Paul Hughes. Great rivalry. In the end, it was a dominant Paul Hughes victory, the second fight. Um, but that doesn't stop Vucenic from being an incredible fighter, an incredible prospect, someone who is going to go far in the future. Absolutely. It's not an easy return fight. Let's be honest. Tiziano Ferranti, right? Undefeated Italian prospect. No, I can't lie. I'm not super familiar with him. His fights have been in a few different sort of regional promotions around, but like I say, undefeated. A lot of the Italian journalists are quite high on him. It seems like. So yeah, give us your read on this fight, Brad. Yeah, Jordan versus Tiziano.
It's a huge fight for Jordan. I'm not going to say that the rivalry between Jordan and Paul is finished yet because
Yep.
who knows? Maybe they get to have their third fight.
Hmm.
That fight for me was one of the best fights I've ever called in Cage Warriors. And, on the night, it ended up being slightly one-sided after the first round. But the drama, the atmosphere in the building that night was absolutely insane. It really, really got to me. I remember speaking to Mark Goddard before the main card started, and even a man of his experience, that came up to me and said, "This is going to be something special." And when a man of Mark's tenure in the sport says that to you, you sit up and take notice. And I just think the simple fact was nobody was beating Paul Hughes that night. I think there were very few 145-pound fighters inside or outside the UFC that were going to take that away from Paul Hughes that night. He had a chip on his shoulder going in. And unfortunately, it wasn't Jordan's night, but every time I watch that fight back, and I've watched it many times, you consider who else would have stayed in that fight for 5 rounds like Jordan did, and I don't think there's many. You know, he could have had his way out of that fight numerous times in the third, fourth, and fifth rounds if he wanted it. He didn't want it. He wanted to carry on. He knew in that fifth round he was not winning that fight on the judges' scorecards, and he still went out there and he still gave it his all, and he was still moving and still trying. And that's a dangerous human being for me. I think technically he's one of the best featherweights in Europe, without a doubt. I think he poses so many problems standing on the ground. The guy's just a complete mixed martial artist. And if you've only ever seen the Hughes fight, that's not a true reflection of who Jordan Vucenic is. Now, Ferranti is coming in as an unknown quantity. He's only had 5 professional fights. He was a good amateur. There's not a massive amount of footage out there. Everyone you speak to on the Italian circuit is very high on him, as you say. And most importantly, if Ferranti loses this fight, who cares? He's lost to Jordan Vucenic, right? Who's probably going to be, fighting for that Cage Warriors title again before the end of the year, depending on what happens with Paul Hughes. And 5 fights into your pro career, no one cares if you lose to Jordan Vucenic, right? He's the man. So Ferranti's got nothing to lose here. The dude can crack. He's dangerous. He's a finisher. He's going to be going into this fight with no weight of expectation on him whatsoever. He's essentially a free man going into this fight because, Cage Warriors we're doing 4 shows in Italy this year, so he's definitely going to be back. We're definitely going to see him in the yellow gloves again. And if he can upset Jordan Vucenic here, absolutely huge. That tips the Cage Warriors featherweight division on its head. Vucenic, conversely, he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders now. This is to put a fine opponent in it, shit or get off the pot, right? He's got to keep winning now. He has to. He can't lose to a guy like Ferranti at this stage in his career. Obviously, I can't give predictions, but I think it's got all the ingredients for a really special main event. I saw a couple of people when the fight was announced saying, "Oh, who is this guy?" Well, you're going to see. You're going to see in the main event next Friday night. You're going to see exactly who this guy is. Yeah, I'm not expecting this one to go the distance, but I'm expecting fireworks while it lasts.
You know what it reminds me of a little bit? Nathan Fletcher on the NYE card, right? He took the loss to Dominic Wooding and then comes back against another. He was undefeated at the time, Alessandro Giordano, right?
Giordano,
yeah. No one outside of the Italian MMA base knew him, but the guy was a threat. The people, he was a big problem, but an unknown quantity. And he took Fletcher to the distance, pushed him really hard. And yeah, it's I don't know. It's the beauty of regional MMA, isn't it? Or regional, Cage Warriors MMA. That you get these sort of contests that the surface read isn't always the full story, I think.
100%. Look, you can look at guys who've maybe not been tested outside of that regional circuit, and you can say, well, who have they really fought? And then they get to the big show and they just blow you away. I mean, you only need to look at a guy like Kalen Lochran. There was criticism of him online before he got to Cage Warriors saying, well, he's got a great record, but who's he really beat? He looks great every time out, but who's he really beat? And then he comes to Cage Warriors and just cuts through everyone like a hot knife through butter. Beating Festus Ahoulu in the manner that he did, beating Luke Shanks, a former champion. The guy's 100% legit. You records are for DJs. Just watch the guys, see how they operate, and Giordano's a perfect example. Man, I was warning everyone about that kid. I was like, he's dangerous. If he can keep this fight on the feet, he can do damage, and that's exactly what we saw. And I rate Nathan as one of the best guys in that division. And I thought Alessandro gave him a fantastic fight. A really good scrum. And yeah, I completely agree with your assessment of that. It's a very similar situation, and I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, that Fletcher one was a fun fight for me because it was my first fight, first Cage Warriors event there as a fan, not as media for once. So yeah,
I miss those days.
Absolutely. It was a fun one. We'll move on then. Incredible main event. we've also got Morgan Charriere versus James Hendin, right? Charriere for such a long time. I mean, I don't know. Has he stepped past that prospect status now? Because he's just clearly an elite fighter. There's no two ways about it, I think, right? Um, but then there's the competitive decision losses, right? To Vucenic and Hughes, majority decision and a split decision. So close. Those two wins, who knows? He might be in the UFC by now. We don't even know. But as it is, he's coming off a win. Split decision win. It was closer than I maybe thought beforehand against Daniel Bazant. But James Hendon, he's a known quantity in Cage Warriors. He's also coming off a win. Fought on Vucenic as well. Fought on Paul Hughes as well. It's it's a good fight. It's the sort of fights that I want to see Charriere in. Personally, like I said, I know you can't give predictions on anything. I would side with the Charriere side if I'm just sort of looking at it stylistically. But the sort of fight that James Hendon in, you can't ever count him out. It's always going to be competitive, and yeah, it's a really interesting matchup. What's your sort of read of the fight?
Yeah, I love Morgan. I mean, you can't not love Morgan, really. Super charismatic. He's got all the qualities outside of the cage of a legit star in the business. And the kid can fight, and he's
Yeah.
always been able to fight, you know. Bit of a messy record, but then you look at the guys who he's been fighting, as a French fighter, really in his career, he had to travel a lot. Fighting guys in their own backyard, probably fighting above his skill level earlier on, just to get fights. But then, you look at his fight with Soren back on Cage Warriors years ago. That was really, really close, and he was coming into his own by the end of that. It was a very, very close fight, and then he beats a tough kid in Lewis Monarch. He beats Dean Truman, the former champion.
Mm-hmm.
Beats Perry Goodwin with that crazy body shot, and the Vucenic and Hughes fights, like you say, a split decision and a majority decision. You know, with three different judges on different nights, maybe they go the other way, and I don't think it would have been, a case of bad decision or robbery if a couple of those rounds and maybe even the fight cards had gone the other way. That they were very, very close, and the same against Daniel Bazant. That was a really close fight as well, and Bazant, again, another guy that no one really knew,
Yeah.
but one of the top students of Zel Glasek, who's a European MMA pioneer and a legend, and anyone coming out of his gym, you know is going to be tough. That was a I was surprised that Morgan took that fight, because it was a guy who, wasn't an established name in Cage Warriors, and a guy who's a very, very good fighter. If you look at the footage out there of him, it was clear the guy is a very high level operator, and it was kind of a what's Morgan doing taking this fight? He
Mm,
probably could have got an easier fight if he wanted, but Morgan's a tough kid, and he comes out and says, "Look, I want to fight the best guys consistently," and that's what he's going to get in James Hendon. Um,
yeah.
Hendon had a close fight with Paul Hughes. Didn't do as well against Jordan Vucenic when they fought. I think it was March last year.
Mm. That
But
was
the kid's
short
clearly
notice, wasn't it?
yeah, it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that
So
that was that crazy card that we had where again there was a massive reshuffle essentially on fight week, and I think we
mm,
ended up with 6 or 7 fights and Hendon stepping up into the main event short notice. But that tells you the kind of cat he is, right? He's tough as nails, and he's willing to fight the best guys out there as well. Coming in off a very good win, we know he's got incredible wrestling. His takedowns are on point. High level judo player, very well credentialed, and super super heavy hands. And I think he's one of those guys who's so well rounded, and so is Morgan. It's going to be very tough to predict how this fight will even play out. Obviously, not going to give predictions on who I think is going to win. But if you'd have asked me how I think the fight's going to play out, I genuinely don't know. Like both of these guys are really well credentialed in all areas. This is a fight that I do see going the distance, and unfortunately, I see it again being a judge's decision.
mm,
Maybe one that there's going to be a bit of talk and a bit of contention about because I think stylistically and skill wise, there's very little separating these two guys. And again, they're two guys who are in that spot now where they kind of need to keep winning at this stage if they are going to be a Cage Warriors champion. Again, in Morgan's case, and for the first time in Hendon's case, the division is potentially going to be open, you would assume that Paul Hughes at some point this year will be in the UFC. So potentially we're going to be talking about a new Cage Warriors featherweight champion being crowned in the second half of this year. And Morgan wants to be there. So does James Hendin. It's a very important fight for both guys.
Mm. Just on Paul Hughes, do you reckon there's any chance that I just saw today, like literally an hour ago, Lerone Murphy said he's got an opponent for UFC London. Do you reckon there's any chance that Paul Hughes could be stepping on that one?
No comment. Unfortunately, that's a
All
no
right.
comment situation for me. I don't know. Look, and I think everyone at Cage Warriors assumed that Paul Hughes would go after that fight. Obviously, he wasn't signed ahead of UFC London,
Yeah.
and for me, I I I kind of felt good about it when he wasn't signed straight away. And that what I didn't want to see Paul do was fight a short notice fight.
Mm.
I'll be completely honest. I don't know anything about the Lerone Murphy fight, whether they have contacted Paul or not. I genuinely don't know. But I don't really want to see Paul take that kind of fight.
No.
And what I would really love is for Paul to maybe fight on the Cage Warriors doubling card if that's possible, and then go in as a superstar. Because I
Mm.
think if Paul were to be able to fight on the Cage Warriors doubling card and get a win on that card, that's going to be the kind of fight that takes him over the edge. And he's not going to be going in there as a late notice, standing guy. He's going to be going in there, like Paddy did, like Connor did, like Molly did, as a legit um, main eventer that's got a huge, huge following behind him. So that's kind of what I want to see from Paul. But look, who knows? I genuinely
Mm.
don't know what the story is with Paul going forward, but I'd be amazed if he's not in the UFC by the end of the year. Super
Yeah.
talented kid.
Oh, he really is. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, to be honest. I wouldn't like to see him fight Lerone on short notice when Lerone's been in camp the whole time. And, everyone knows what a sort of devastating or highly touted prospect with such high potential. It's just not one you want to see for a guy with the potential of Hughes as well. Like, how far is he going to go? We don't know. And we don't want to see those two prospects clashing that early. But let's move on to the young gun, Jamie Richardson versus Justin Burlinson, possibly my most sort of anticipated fight for this card. I think there's a sort of not mystique, but I don't know, just there's something about Jamie Richardson that every time I don't know, he's got an 11-8 record. It's not the best record in the world, but every time he fights, I'm going to tune in. I'm definitely going to watch. And on the other side, Justin Burlinson, who's had a couple of fights not go his way, but I mean the ceiling is still so high for him. It really is, yeah. Like I say, one of my most sort of anticipated fights on the card. And yeah, well, give me your thoughts on this one, because I mean, are you as excited as I am for this one?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
This is what I like to call a value for money fight. This is the kind of fight, when you drop your 50 quid or whatever you're spending on a ticket, with these guys on the card, whether it's Richardson, whether it's Burlinson, you're gonna get your money's worth at some point. And the fact that they're both fighting each other, I think is it's a recipe for carnage, isn't it?
It
These
really
these these
is.
are two guys who are just gonna tear lumps out of each other. They're both really good all rounders. Burlinson's a fantastic grappler, really good ground and pound. Jamie's a good wrestler, good on the ground as well. But I don't think either of these guys have ever got into a fist fight that they didn't enjoy.
Mm.
You look at Jamie's fights with Phil Wells. I think the second one especially, one of the most bananas back and forth fights I've ever called. Um, he beat Matt Bonner, the former middleweight champ. He had a really good showing against Matthias Frederick. He was
Yeah.
winning that fight, right? He was 2 rounds up. I think he was stopped early in the third round, but he was two rounds up against Matthias Frederick, who at the time was just a berserker who was taking everyone out.
Yeah.
Um, super, super talented kid. It didn't really click with James Sheehan last time out. It was a bit of a stalemate. But I think, Justin Burlinson brings a different kind of style, and I think these guys are going to mix it up a little bit more. Look, Burlinson has been in some wars in Cage Warriors.
Mm.
He's had a couple of fights. They've both been absolutely bonkers. And that fight against Reese McKee,
Oh,
fight of the year last year, and again, one of the best Cage Warriors fights I've ever called. I thought I was going to have a panic attack by the end of it. My heart was going all over the place. I couldn't breathe. It was absolutely insane. Just wild.
mm.
The emotion the emotional roller coaster of kind of seeing Reece take all that damage and thinking, man, he's gonna lose this fight in his hometown, and this is gonna suck so bad for him, and it's gonna suck all the atmosphere out of the venue, and then for Reece to come back and finish him the way he did, and then obviously you've got that incredible video that went out on social media of them sat in the back of an ambulance eating a slice of pizza together. It's just everything that you love about this sport, right? The sportsmanship and the camaraderie. Absolutely fantastic. And I get the feeling we're going to see a very similar kind of situation between
Yeah.
Richardson and Burlinson. I think they're going to tear lumps out of each other. They're both veterans of the game. And I'm sure they'll be enjoying a slice of pizza or a frosty beverage together afterwards. But yeah, very much like you, this is one of the ones that I'm looking forward to. And it's one of those fights that makes me wish I could call in sick and sneak in at the back and, and just watch it as a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's brilliant. And those sort of top three cards, fights, they're the ones that we know they're sort of locked in that position now. And it's a brilliant sort of trio header for Cage Warriors 150. Now, if I look at the rest of the card scrolling down, there are a couple of fights that sort of bounce out to me, but probably nothing more than Omran Chaaban versus Aslani. Aslani last fight came in and just sparked Adam Darby. Like, gone. Was it 20 seconds, something like that? Like, ridiculous. Just came in. A lot of hype around Adam Darby, a lot of interest in him, and Aslani just shuts it down instantly. Whereas you look at Omran, I mean, Lebanese griller, fighting out of Finland, training with Team KF. I mean, got Finnish descent myself, so I always got to represent for those boys. But he just looked incredible. What he did to George McManus. I think McManus is a really good litmus test for a lot of fighters. I mean, that was just brutal from Omran in that fight. It's brilliant. I spoke with Omran recently. In fact, I'm having on with an interview on Monday, so we'll get further in detail. Go check that out. But yeah, it's a brilliant fight. There's a little bit of not straight up animosity, but Omran's definitely sort of getting into the I don't know if it's mind games or just the way he approaches every fight, but there's some intrigue there. It's a brilliant fight. Again, like I say, this card is really quite sensational. When I initially spoke to you, I told you this off camera, but we were going to maybe like do a double header of this card and the 151 as well, as they're like back-to-back nights, right? But there's just too many fights on this card to talk about. So yeah, give me the read.
Omran's a guy like you say, that he gets the game. He understands talking up a fight and kind of building, maybe not building animosity, but building interest in the fight. Super talented guy. Known for what he can do on the ground, and then really showed off his boxing in that fight against George McManus.
Yeah,
I think George is a guy you don't necessarily want to go to the ground with if you don't have to, because his experience in grappling is, almost unparalleled in that division. He's been grappling competitively since he was very, very young. Obviously, his brother a fighter as well, and his dad the head coach, so he's literally grown up in it. And Omran, training with Team KF. There's just something going on at that gym at the moment, right? There's so many guys doing such good work. And then when you've got a coach like Chris Fields, former Cage Warriors champion, Tom King, one of the best BJJ black belts in Europe, and guys like Carl Pendred coming in as well, another former Cage Warriors champion, doing the work with those guys, and the fighters that team captain James Webb, former Cage Warriors champion, and the Shelley brothers, Mandu, all those guys kind of coming up at the same time. It's a superb environment. Mush is a guy who's been around for a long time. I remember calling Mush's amateur fights. And I guess the only knock on Mush is maybe he's just not had the consistency. And you see that in his record. He's fought some good guys. Losing to the likes of Lewis Glisman, certainly, no shame in that whatsoever. But he seems to be in a really good place. He had that super impressive Cage Warriors debut, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you can do against a guy like Chaaban. That should be a lot of fun. It's another one of those fights that's maybe kind of tucked away a little bit on the undercard, but there's definitely potential for fireworks there. And speaking of, Emil Brown versus Daniel Skibiński. Oh my Lord. We obviously have like, spreadsheets that fights get added to when they're signed and when we can release them and stuff. But there's a Cage Warriors group chat where Ian Dean will come in, and as soon as the fight's been signed off for release, he'll put a little message in there. And when my phone went off and I saw that fight, I was just like, oh my God. Oh, like that one's gonna be wild. Like Emil Brown is a banger, and Skibiński
Yes,
doesn't know how to have a boring fight. So looking forward to seeing both those guys tear chunks out of each other.
no doubt. Last fight, I'd like to just go over briefly. Lona Kavanagh taking on Davide Scarano.
Yes.
2-4-0 prospects. Yeah, talk to me about that one.
Yeah, I mean, man, Lona Kavanagh, just a joy to watch.
Yeah,
He's just one of those guys that you can sit and watch his highlights just over and over again. Just there's an incredible amount of potential with this kid. Training out of GB top team, got a fantastic bunch of people around him. And he's one of those guys like every time you see him, he just kind of looks that little bit better. Um, that stoppage of Ryan Morgan, absolutely insane. I mean, that's going to be on the highlight reels for a long, long time. And beating a very solid guy, Nanda Sanchez, last time out as well. But, he's going up against a fellow prospect here, and a guy who brings something different to previous opponents. Scarano is a guy who's mainly known for his groundwork.
Mhm.
So, how does Lona react when he's constantly getting wrestled? Because that's what you've got to take away from Kavanagh, right? You've got to take away those strikes. So you've got to push him against the cage. You've got to be shooting for those takedowns. You've got to tire those arms out when you're trying to make him defend the takedowns up against the cage. Can he still box your head off in the third round when his arms are tired, when all that lactic acid's built up? These are the questions that we need to find out about these prospects. And by the same note, can Davide get that takedown before Lorna Kavanagh takes his head off? It's another fight which is a coin flip potentially going in between two really really good prospects.
Yeah,
It's the kind of fight that I love to see on Cage Warriors because you're not going to see a fight like this in the regional scene because 2 4-0 guys aren't going to fight each other. And I think that's the good thing about Cage Warriors. It's a
yeah,
meaningful fight. Whoever wins moves on in the division, and whoever doesn't gets to rebuild later on in the year. Can't wait.
absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant fight, brilliant card. We're probably even missing some. Well, in fact, we are missing some out, but I think that's all we got time for today because I don't want to take too much of Brad's time out, and we've probably been on here for at least half an hour or so. But definitely tune into Cage Warriors 150. Going down in London. March 17th, incredible card. The next day there's another card on as well, and then there's a whole host
It's
of
it's the it's the next week. So
next day.
151 is
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
following Friday. So we've obviously
Yeah.
got Friday Cage Warriors, Saturday UFC, Friday Cage Warriors again. So it's a
Yeah, yeah.
great 7 days, 8 days to be a fight fan in the UK.
Yeah, my mistake. But yeah, brilliant set of fights. We've got Dublin after that, Manchester, Rome, and everything in between. Thank you so much for your time today, Brad. If you'd like to sort of plug your social media, give any shout outs, anything like that, feel free.
My social media sucks, man. All I do is talk about trainers and beers and fights and stuff. So if you're interested in any of the above, I'm at MMA Brad 48 on Twitter and occasionally on Instagram. Don't do
Yeah.
TikTok though, because I'm nearly 40. Sorry.
Yeah, same. I'm only 24. I don't have TikTok. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Brad, for your time today. I really do appreciate it.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me on.